Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. If it's night, day, morning, wherever you might be, I am really delighted you are here with me. And I want to give a special shout out to GMAT Club for hosting this event. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. My name is Liza Wheel, and I am the founder of Gatehouse Admissions. And I'm here to talk to you about Stanford and Harvard. And I want to jump right in. So we're going to try, and I'm going to try sharing my screen. We're going to see how this goes. And I'm going to jump into this presentation. All right, guys, I hope you can see this. Here's what we're going to talk about today. The HBS and GSB applications, Harvard Business School and Stanford's Graduate School of Business. The challenge of actually just submitting. As I mentioned, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself before we get into the presentation. My name's Liza Wheel. I am a Sloan MBA from MIT Sloan. Had an amazing time there. That's surely why in part why I'm here today. Once I graduated from MIT Sloan, I headed to Bain & Company for a few years, and I was a consultant and case team leader there. When I left Bain, I moved into more brand and product management in the educational technology space. But it was actually when I was at Bain & Company that I started coaching people on the admissions process to business school. The associate consultants at the time were, so I was in the post-MBA role. The associate consultants are in the pre-MBA role, and they were thinking about business school. And I loved working with them on their essays and helping them kind of explore their stories and communicate who they were through the written application. So that started way back when I was at Bain, and it just sort of continued on and on. And really at this point, I have over 15 years of admissions consulting experience. About 8 years ago, I left the more typical corporate world to dedicate my time to this. So I've been doing this in a full-time capacity for the past 8 years. And through those years, I have worked a lot on Stanford and Harvard applications. It's no wonder they get a ton of applicants. And I've really learned to appreciate the amount of work that goes into those applications. And actually, that's part of the reason why I founded Gatehouse Admissions. I have a little secret. This is actually my first real presentation as part of Gatehouse Admissions. I just created this practice recently. And I did it in part because of these two applications, just how challenging they are, and really wanting to make sure that clients, folks that are tackling these applications are really going into the process with the right mindset so that they're best primed for success. So anyway, okay, enough about me. Let's jump into the good stuff. Here are the things that we're going to cover today. I just want to level set in terms of the outcomes, a reminder of the outcomes. I don't think the information I'm going to share is going to surprise you, but I still like to just contextualize with some stats for everybody. And then I want to take a little walk backwards, do a little then versus now comparison in terms of the essays that the essay questions that these two schools ask. And then, I'm still an ex-management consultant, so I like lists and things like that. I'm going to share 5 Bs just to help you with that mindset I mentioned just a second ago as you first start tackling these applications. And then I'm going to turn it over to you guys for Q&A. So please, I'm excited to see your questions, excited to help you think about this process. So, keep those questions coming, think about those questions, and we'll have some time at the end of the presentation to dig into them. All right. So a reminder of the outcomes. As I said, if you know anything about Harvard or Stanford, these numbers aren't necessarily going to surprise you, but let's go over them. So in the 2019 to 2020 application season, Harvard received over 9,000 applications. 11.5% of them, those applications were accepted. So just, 1,058 were accepted. So everybody kind of always looks at that number, the sort of the acceptance rate and what that means in terms of how many people were accepted. I kind of always look at it the flip side. So if 1,000-ish people were accepted, over 8,000 people were rejected, okay? I mention that because that's the normal spot to be in. I just, I don't want to, most people are rejected. I want to just quickly, the story doesn't change when you look at GSB, but let's look at GSB. So 2019, 2020, 7,300 plus applications were submitted. They have a teensy tiny acceptance rate. So they don't have quite as many applications as Harvard. And of those applications, they accept even fewer. So only 500, a little over 500 of those applications were accepted. So again, we do the math. Over 6,800 people were rejected. Those are huge numbers. 8,000 and 6,800. Now, there might be a lot of overlap in between those, of course, but it is still the vast majority of people who apply do not get accepted. And I won't be all Debbie Downer during this presentation. It's just to be realistic about what you're up against. So what's the reality here? No business school reads more applications than either of these two schools. No one is doing as much work, I would even say, in reading those applications because they just don't have as many to read as HBS and Stanford have. And therefore, and when you think about those acceptance rates, no business school says no to more people. Okay, so for every yes, these schools have to find another 10 to 15 applicants to say no to. And just to, not to scare you guys more, because that's not what this is about. Again, it's about being realistic. These numbers are bound to go up in round one of 2021, where by all kind of accounts and indications, we are expecting the volumes to be even higher, which means for every yes, they're going to have to say no to even more people. And the reason why I say this is because my whole philosophy around Harvard and Stanford is all you want to do is make it as hard as possible for them to say no to you. That's what we're going to talk about today, how you do that. But before we do, I want to just think about the implications here. The admissions teams of HBS and GSB have an incredibly challenging job, right? They have to, of all these amazing applicants, they have to figure out who to say no to. Not who to say yes to, but who to say no to. That's incredibly challenging. Not feeling sorry for them, feel more sorry for the applicants for sure, but it is a really tough job. And I guess because of that, it would follow sort of logically that you yourself will have a very challenging job even in applying. And I want to contextualize that in a second by taking a walk down memory lane, so to speak. I want to look at earlier versions of the HBS app and GSB and contrast it where it is now, because I think it'll help explain why I think these applications are so challenging. So HBS's application from the aughts, one of my favorite words now. So this is from, I think, 2009 or 2010. HBS asked a lot of questions back then. They asked what your 3 most substantial accomplishments were. They asked you when you learned from a mistake. Then you had to kind of choose your own adventure situation where you could choose like how you engage with the community or when you had a difficult decision. So you had definitely a lot of questions to answer. And if I can do my math right, about 1,800 words to do it in. So pretty comprehensive, but they're very specific. You knew exactly what the school wanted to know, right? The question, super precise. You knew what the answer should be. You should focus on an accomplishment. You should focus on a failure. It's also very contained. You knew exactly how many words you could use. 400 words for that, 600 words for that, 200 for this. Super, very, very prescriptive when it came to that application. In 2013, they kind of blew that up. And they introduced a single application essay question. And they changed it one year, but they went back. Who knows what will happen this fall, if it'll stay this one. I hope so. But here it is. As we review your application, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy for the Harvard MBA program? No word limit. So look at that question. What more would you like us to know? No word limit. That's a complete blank slate. And if you're like just about anybody applying to the school, that's really terrifying. What do you do with that space? It's just one single question, but it's far more work for you. I'm not going to go through the whole thing with GSB, but I do just want to make the same point. GSB is played a little bit with their questions of the past, 15 or so years. But they've basically sort of stripped out questions. And they've also reduced word count. So of these other essays, they had an essay about a time where you created change in an organization. They've gotten rid of that one. They do have a question of why Stanford, and that's been present for a while now, but they've reduced the number of words that they suggest you use for it. One thing has stayed constant, this question: what matters most to you and why? With a suggested word count of 750 words. What matters most to you and why? That's a really tough question if you think about it, because most people don't really often think about that question at all. These questions are very, very difficult because, look, what matters most to you is what matters most to the GSB. That's what they're saying by this. This question is really important to them. They want to know what matters most to you. So even outside, the other thing I like to say is even outside of the essays, these are demonstrably more difficult applications. First off, with the essays I just showed you, what matters most to you and why, and what more do you want us to know? They require much more judgment and self-confidence, just kind of like the confidence to kind of really answer the question truthfully than most of the other schools' essays. These are by far, in my opinion, the hardest questions in all the clients and all the applications I've worked on. These are the hardest, the questions that my clients struggle with the most. But even beyond the essays, which this presentation admittedly is mostly focused on, these schools' applications offer considerable challenge. First off, they have extensive online application questions with really tight character counts, things like your most significant challenge in each of your roles, all of different awards that you have received, and then you have to leave it blank if you have never had any. And by the way, that's okay. But there's all these questions, and it takes a lot of time to fill those out, right? And then, if you look at HBS, they have a very unique interview structure. It's fully customized to your experience. And on GSB's side, on Stanford's side, they have sort of what they call sort of mini short answer essays in the application, which are not mini. They're 250 word essays. They had 3 of them last year. Be curious to see if they keep them up again this fall. These are really tough applications. And the reason I say all this is because I often work with people who are like, I'm applying to XYZ schools. I'm applying to MIT Sloan. I'm applying to Columbia. I'm applying to Tuck. I'm applying to Ross. But I'm just going to go ahead and throw my hat into the ring at Stanford, or I'm going to throw my hat in or just kind of toss in an application to Harvard. And from what I just told you, like there is no just kind of tossing your hat in. We've looked at the numbers. They have to say no to so many people. You want to be one of the people they say yes to. You've got to work really hard for it. So if HBS or GSB, if you want to throw your hat in, do it and do it with gusto and work really hard for it. Because that's the way to get them to say, yeah, to keep you in saying yes and not have them say no to you. So there's no just throwing your hat in. It takes time and it takes real effort, but you can do it. And so that, I want to share with you my 5 Bs when it comes to working on these applications. And I've kind of lumped them together because it really is a mindset that I want you guys to keep in mind. Okay, number 1, be honest about who you are. I can't tell you how often I hear, how do you think I should differentiate myself? Let me fill you in on something. I know this sounds like kind of obvious, but look, everybody is different. You are differentiated. We are all unique. So you have to free yourself up by thinking, how am I going to differentiate myself? And think about, instead, who am I? And that's what you communicate. You need to be honest about being you. That's what the schools want to know. Focus on what you want to tell them, not what you think they want to hear. You will always go down the wrong path if you start thinking about what you think they want to hear. Think about telling them about who you are. That is the way to differentiate yourself. That is the way to communicate the things that they want to hear. There's no right answer. So the only right answer, I'm beating a drum here, is the answer that is true to you and that you're being truthful to yourself. And don't bother comparing yourself. I know this is really easy to do and I get it. Try not to compare yourself to others who've gotten in or been rejected. It's just noise. Let it go. Look inward, focus on you, not around you. So this is kind of the mindset I want you to keep in mind from the very get-go before you start looking at those essays, okay? Also, before you work on those essays, I want you to brainstorm. I want you to really inventory your experiences and be expansive. So get a notebook or open your laptop and really start inventorying your values, your choices, your accomplishments, your failures, the lives you've touched, lives that have touched yours. Really think about how you became you. I know it sounds a little lofty and not necessarily business school related, but it is, because you are, whether you're in the office or not, you're you, and that's who we're trying to communicate. Go beyond work. Don't focus just on you in the office as you're starting to reflect on who you are. Go beyond you in your present day format if you're in your 20s, or replace that with 30s if you're in your 30s. Think about your childhood, your upbringing. Think about what you do outside of work. Think about moments when you've been incredibly proud or incredibly challenged. Those are the kind of moments that have helped define you. And that's what you want to capture when you do this sort of brainstorming or inventory. Once you've done all that, kind of gotten it out there, then take a step back and see what patterns emerge, where you draw your energy from, where you're at your best, where you're at your worst. It takes this sort of really expansive, putting it all out there to be able to kind of find the threads in it, to find the connections. If you jump too soon into thinking about the questions, you'll miss so many of these more subtle moments that have influenced you. And going back to the prior slide of being honest about who you are, that this is the essence that, again, will ultimately differentiate you. So you got to invest in this. Then you can start thinking about the questions. So my advice here is be strategic in content and approach. Remember the question the school is asking, especially for Stanford, right? Stanford is asking what matters most to you and why. Forget everything else you think you want to tell them and think about that question. What matters most to you and why? What gets you up in the morning? What are you fighting for? Where do you draw your energy from? What are you running towards? What are, those kind of, when you strip everything else out, what matters most to you and why? You've got to spend the time in coming up with that answer first. Then the essay starts to fall into place. It's not the other way around where you think, oh, that's a really cool story I want to tell Stanford. No. Answer the question first and then see what stories support it. Also, consider what the schools already know about you. They've got your resume. These essays, neither essay should just be a repeat of what's in your resume. They know that. Use these precious words, I really do think that, to dig deeper and reveal inner motivations, those proudest moments, those difficult choices. That's what this is. These essays are for, is to go beyond the surface level of what they can see in the resume and explore who you are. Okay? So once you kind of come up with that answer and really thought about okay, here are the things I want to tell this school. Then the next step is really figure out how to connect it all. Is it a journey? Are you sort of sharing with them where you started and how you got to here? Is it a critical moment that sort of changed the direction for you for one reason or another? Or is it what I call a mosaic, right? A mosaic is particularly, it's much less valuable or relevant to Stanford. It's much more valuable or relevant to Harvard, where maybe you're trying to show multiple traits or multiple things or moments in your life, and we're showing a full picture of you. That might be a mosaic approach for that essay. Or is there some other way? I also really think with both of these essays, we get stuck to okay, here are the different, 4 different ways you can tackle this. If there were 4 different ways to tackle this, the essay, the essays would be a lot more specific. I feel like these schools are giving you a lot of flexibility to do what's right for you to tell your story. So don't feel like you have to go with a journey or a critical moment or a mosaic. Go what's best for you as you start exploring your experiences and your answers. Okay, number 4, be patient. I'm telling you, these essays are so tough. So remember the topic of this presentation. Even submitting these applications is a lot of work. Recognize that they will change over time. Be patient with yourself. I normally say to the folks I work with, I never want them to send me to work to an A on their first drafts, because that just doesn't exist with these essays. It is a process of discovery and exploration, and you want to just set your mind frame, your mindset around that again. It's going to grow over time. So build a timeline. The point is this: build a timeline that gives you ample time to write, rewrite, iterate, tweak, explore, rewrite again, iterate again. This is not a weekend or a week or 2 weeks. This is 1-2 months of really working on these essays. So start thinking about that timeline now. We're in May, you've got time, but by now-ish, you want to start really working on these essays so you have enough time to iterate on them before hitting submit. All right, I got one more B, and then I've got a few no's, but one more B. Be holistic with your application. I focused a lot on these core essays and the sort of mind frame and the way you want to tackle them, but there's so many different aspects. There's a recommenders, there's a resume. Each aspect of these applications is really a chance for you to shine. And by the way, some of these other ways are they're a lot more contained where the schools are asking for specific things. So it's a different exercise, completely different exercise than these really broad essays. So take advantage of them. Wow up that resume, help, remind your recommenders of all the awesome accomplishments you've done. And then also I mentioned the online applications. They're really tedious, but in my mind, they're a total boon because that gives you more opportunity to share with the school all the different aspects of you that you couldn't in those essays, okay? So that's the other thing. You're gonna have this tendency to wanna cram everything into those essays. You don't need to. The great thing about these schools, they ask so many different questions throughout the application. You'll have a chance to reflect or to reflect who you are from start to finish, really, okay? All right, just before we talk about questions, just some 5 quick no's. So no clever writing can disguise weaker stories. So I say that because sometimes people, look, I love helping people communicate who they are through the written word. I wouldn't be in this role if I didn't, but the written word is only as valuable as the story itself. The story itself is where it's at. Get the stories right. Don't worry about, clever writing techniques. That's superfluous. Focus on the right stories and then communicating them the right way. But the stories are where the schools are going to be evaluating on you, not if you open it with an awesome opening. It's great to do that. Don't get me wrong, but focus on the stories, okay? No amount of love for the schools will differentiate you enough to get in. Okay, let me give you a little secret here. Everybody I've ever talked to loves these 2 schools. HBS and Stanford know how much everybody loves them. Don't waste the words in these essays trying to demonstrate how much you love HBS or GSB, because that actually doesn't differentiate you at all because they don't get to know you as you're kind of, fawning over these schools. The whole strategy in this is reveal who you are. And don't worry about trying to prove to them that you have, insurmountable love for them. It's just not a way to differentiate yourself. No vulnerability is inhuman. Okay, guys, it's okay to have weaknesses. It's okay to be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to reveal yours. I mean that. We feel this pressure with these schools that we have to be perfect. No one's perfect. And also nobody likes anybody who's perfect, right? Vulnerability, weaknesses are okay. And you can explore those through writing in these essays. And on the other opposite side, or slightly related, no bragging is necessary, okay? Let your experiences speak for themselves. And what I mean by that is, if you focus on the facts and you focus on, how situations unfolded, the schools will be able to infer how much of a rock star you are. You don't have to always tell them and I am the best, and I am one of, whatever it might be. Tell the story and let them see that. It's a much more compelling way to communicate your strengths. It's much more subtle. And then lastly, because I just think it's important, no decision that these schools can give you can determine who you are unless you let it. We saw those stats in the beginning. These schools are really, really impossible to get into. It's really easy to be said no to from these schools. Most people here knows that's okay. If that's the outcome, they will not determine your future, you will. So if you want to, quote, throw your hat into the ring, know that the effort is definitely, you need to put it in to even have a fighting chance, but then also be proud of your work at the end of the day that you kind of really did it and did yourself justice, and whatever they decide, so be it. the journey itself, I'm confident, will make you stronger once you get to business school, wherever that might be, more reflective, more self-aware, and all of those are skills that are going to serve you in the long run, no matter what. So guys, that's it. So I'm going to flip back over and I'm going to take some of your questions. All right. I hope I am, okay, I see some questions. All right. Can Liza talk numbers, metrics about military vets applying to these schools, more specifically those with Service Academy West Point background? So Daniel, I don't have like specific numbers or metrics, but I will say this, the schools really, they appreciate the leadership training, the responsibility, the rigor, the commitment, everything that is associated with the Service Academies West Point. So I see that, especially, well, both schools and all these schools, they recognize the value of the leadership and the training that you've received. So, the one thing I do, these schools do typically have readers that might be trained and really know how to ascertain differences in applications coming from the military. So just like anything with HBS and GSB, they want superstars. However you define it, they want to know that you're a star. So I think that's one thing, is however you communicate through your resume, your recommenders, your essays, your accomplishments, we want to really feel that, okay, even among this incredibly talented group of people, you're stronger at. But I will say, definitely, yeah, schools are very friendly and excited about folks applying from the Service Academy, HBS and GSB included. And I hope I'm going to see another question, or if there's anything I need to do. Okay. All right. I'm seeing the questions pop up now, guys. This is great. There's only 3 years of experience to make an easy no for my application. Press soon. Not necessarily. And, if you are applying now, if you're matriculating with 3 years, it's harder than matriculating. So if you're applying at 3, matriculating at 4, not necessarily. And even the other, like, even if you're applying with 2 and matriculating at 3, it's not impossible. There are no definite no's. There are people who will get into these programs with, there'll be a handful of people who get into these programs with a year or 2 of experience. So there's no reason on that basis alone to say it's an automatic no. It all depends on you. I will say, even applying with 3 years of experience and matriculating with 4, there you are. It's just the way the numbers go. They know that you still have a runway ahead of you, and so they might say no to you the first time you apply, because they just want to see, well, we like what we see in Pursuit, but we'd love to see another year and see what they can accomplish in that time period. So what I generally say to people who apply with 3 years of experience, go for it hard. But if you hear no, that doesn't necessarily mean no forever. These schools really are friendly. I don't know if friendly is the right word. They're agnostic about reapplicants. Reapplicants get into these programs, all the time. They see it as like, oh, okay, this person's applying to us. Great. All right. Or applying to us again. Great. Let's see how they didn't cross the bar last year. Do they cross the bar this year? If so, great. If not, then no. But I just say what I generally say with people who are applying with 3 years of experience: be ready to hear the no, but just be ready to interpret it as a no. But if you want to give it another shot, maybe go for it, because you'll just have one more year of experience that will probably make you already a more attractive candidate, because you'll have that many more accomplishments under your belt. Mentioned application volume increasing. What % increase are you projecting compared to last cycle? Any comments on HBS saying would be open to a larger 2021 intake? I don't have any % increase. I don't know, because look, right now it's a little bit, it's so iffy. The schools are sort of dealing with this. How do we handle people who either, can't get here because of visas, or are now like, I don't know if I want to go to school now. And some of those people may be able to get deferrals. Some of them may not. And so they might choose to walk away from an acceptance and reapply. We're definitely in a state of flux. And so you've got that issue. Then you've got what's going on with the economy. In general, sort of back in 2008, 2009, during the Great Recession, there was an uptick in B school applications. So we can assume at this point that could happen, depending on what goes on the economy, goes on in the economy. But I guess what I always say on that is like, look, so Stanford's acceptance rate is 6%. Like, is any one individual going to feel a difference if that goes down to 4% or gets bumped to 7%? These numbers don't really, they matter, and it's important to be realistic. But if that number shifts, that's from 8,000 to 8,400 people saying no to, or 8,000 going down to 7,900 people hearing no, it doesn't really matter. It's always hard to get into these schools. You always had to bring your best. That's just a way, I say that in part, Joe, because I just don't feel like it's important to know, but it's impossible right now to really predict what's going to happen. So don't get too stuck on that. And if, don't get too stuck on that as you evaluate. It's not a system that you can game. I guess that's my point. Daniel, even though schools haven't released their applications, can we start preparing essays based on past year's application requirements? So Daniel, for HBS and GSB, my philosophy, and everybody differs on this stuff, I think it's worthwhile to start early if you can, for two reasons. Number one, so, Stanford hasn't changed its core question of what matters most to you and why since, I think, like 2003 or 2004, sometime in the early 2000s, it was introduced. So, if history sort of is our best predictor of the future, we could assume that one's going to come back around. Same with HBS. Since they released it in 2014, they had 1 year that they did something similar, not quite the same, but similar. And then they've gone back to this one. So I think, where, as opposed to other schools, you've seen, we see a lot more changes in the questions. So that's one reason I think, who knows, but it's like, at least the chances are greater that it's going to stay constant. But the other thing I would say is the reflections. We just talked about this like crazy journey that, it's pretty amorphous, even what I was describing, and sort of, a lot of self-reflection and a lot of deep thinking. That to me is going to serve you well for any other application. So that's another reason, like, I think if you've got your test score, which I know probably is opening a whole new topic, but if you got your test score out of the way and want to get started, I think you can. I think on the other schools, if it's not an HBS or a Stanford, I would just be ready. Like, I would probably start with questions that I think are most common across schools. So if they have any kind of goal statement, what are your goals in the future? Why this school? I might start with that one. Just because I find that other schools change their questions a little bit more, and you don't want to spend a ton of time, working on crafting this beautiful essay only to have it not be, not work for the essay questions that come out. So neat. Talk about the difference between applying round 1 or round 2. Does it really make a difference if you're choosing as which round you apply in? So neat, great question. I was just having this question. I was discussing this topic this morning, as a matter of fact. So, it's more or less impossible to predict. This is, again, my philosophy. It's kind of like inside baseball or inside trading, I guess. Like, it's impossible to know for any given applicant, for any given school, in any given year, in any given round, which round would actually be better for that individual until that round is far behind us, right? It's just impossible for us to say, like, definitively, like, oh, you should have applied round 2, or you should have applied round 1. We just can't know that. So don't bother trying to figure it out. What I generally say is, if you are ready for round one, because we can't know that, like round one or round two would be different, I always say get it in for round one, in part because, if you need to delay, you've got round two. And also because it is a blank slate as far as the schools are concerned. So it just feels at the average, or like at the aggregate, that's where I want it. At the aggregate, round one, when there's a blank slate, that's going to be the better time period. Round two is not, even for these schools. I work with plenty of folks that are targeting Harvard and Stanford in round two. It's not like a automatic ding if you apply in round two. So if you need to apply in round two, apply in round two. And that's fine. There will be tons of other applicants in round two and tons of other in round one. But at this point, May 7th, if you have the time and the energy to get it in for round one, get it in round one. If you're not ready, either because of your test scores or your essays, go for round two. And that's okay too. Are there any boundaries for getting too personal? Teen pregnancy, deaths in the family, et cetera. This is from Cody. Great question. I think there are very few limits on how personal you can go. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. There's very few limits, and I don't think teen pregnancy or deaths in the family, they do not feel too personal. I think, though, what I would say, Cody, is that, sometimes it's tempting to choose a story because it feels like it would be well received. Or it would it would capture their attention. And remember, that's not our goal. Our goal is for them to get to know you. So what I always say in this situation is, if a core, especially for like Stanford, but even for Harvard, for both of them, if a story is core to you, if in understanding it, we understand you better, or if you can't define who you are really without revealing that story, then it's totally fair play. If the story is kind of like this, about like a kind of like to catch their attention, it's just a gimmick, then cut it, because they're going to see right through that, and that's going to actually hurt your candidacy. So that's what I always say. It all figures. You got to figure out first what is core to you and communicate that. And if that story is in there, that's great. That's fine. It's not too personal. Okay. Can you suggest a few ways to ease the introspection process and to bring the best outcome? What kind of stories are important? Himanshi, great question. If I had the answer to that, it's incredibly hard to kind of to translate, from like, all the inventorying of experiences to, okay, now what do I write about? I will say, like, really think about choices you've made and why you've done them. I would start there. I would think about your biggest accomplishments, moments when you were tremendously proud. And again, moments when you were tremendously challenged, when you were scared. I would also think about the influences in your life. Again, parents, experiences, times when you had, times when you had to react. And then after that, that's the part that gets hard of, okay, I've thought about all these things. What do I now choose? And I think that unfortunately, there's no right answer. And it's certainly an area where I spend a lot of time with my clients, is really thinking about, once I know all the stories, then starting to see the patterns. But I do think once you start thinking about those, you can look for patterns. You can even ask a friend to review it if you trust that person. I mean, probably you're going to cover some personal stuff in there. But it's a little bit like, okay, going back to that overarching question of kind of what are you fighting for? What gets you up in the morning? And then looking for those stories that exemplify that. That would be once you brainstorm and inventory these stories, then I want you to ask yourself what you're fighting for, what you're driving towards, and then looking at which of the stories that you've captured exemplify that might be a good way to start. Question about waitlist. Given a large number of international admits are likely to seek deferrals, does that increase the chances of getting off the wait list? So I think the answer depends, because we don't know, we just don't know the numbers involved. HBS has said flat out that they've made their wait pool larger than they have in past years. How much larger, I don't know. But if you think about it, like, okay, so if they're going to see 400 deferrals till next year, did they already add, 600 more people to the wait pool? I do believe there's going to be more movement on the wait list. But what I don't know is if that's going to translate to better chances of getting off the wait list, because it all depends on how much they already put, how much additional applicants they already put into that wait pool. Yeah, so I don't know in terms of chances. They might have already planned and made it somewhat stable, but I do think in sheer numbers, we will see a lot of movement in both wait lists for Harvard and Stanford and the other schools as the the weeks and the months go on. Jayati, I am an applicant for 2+2 this round. Due to COVID, I think my GMAT would range from 690, 700. How bad is that given I am an entrepreneur with funding raised? So I think that, so to be transparent on the 2+2 is I have found the thing with the 2+2 program is you got to think about it like this. They have very little reason to take you off the market now. This is the way I think about it, right? This is all option. It's all like option analysis. And you were asking them to say, hey, place a bet on me now because I'm worth it. I'm going to be even better in 2 to 3 years when you would typically see me. I'm going to be so good then that you want to accept me now so I don't risk either not going to business school or not going to your business school. So that's kind of what the trade-off that the schools are sort of trying to assess is like, would we see this person anyway? And if so, why don't we just hold off on waiting to see them again? So, that's the way I think about, the way I think about the 2+2 program and the decision that the school has to make. So I think the tricky part with the 690 to 700 is what we have seen is that for these programs, they generally, the GMAT skew, or they're a little more tightly concentrated over those bigger numbers around 730, 740. So, I think a 690, 700 may be, it's going to probably hurt you at these schools. Doesn't say not to go for it. I'm not saying not to go for it though. Again, be realistic. It's going to be a tough battle with that score, despite the fact that you're an entrepreneur, you already have funding, which is amazing. That's amazing. So again, I'm not saying not to go for it. Be realistic. I will say this, HBS, they say this all this time. And I've worked with tons of 2+, people who applied 2+2, didn't get in, and now, 3, 4, 5 years later, applying again, they get in, it's totally fine. It's cool. HBS is super friendly, and GSB too. They're super friendly to people who have applied. It's not too different from the reapplicant situation. So if you apply and don't get in, that's okay. They'll have your name on file, and you can give it a go again in a few years. Sunit, having not been able to change our past GPA, job, GMAT score, how big of a difference can the essays really make in our application? It's a great question. I personally don't think they, how do I say this? It goes back to that comment I had about great writing can't change weak stories, right? So no matter what your essays say, if you don't have the greatness in there, like the great accomplishments, whatever that great accomplishments can come in all shapes and sizes, and maybe to you sound mundane, but they're still great, of whether it's a time that shows how much commitment you put in, or how hard you fought for something, or how you changed a process that really made a difference. Those are all great accomplishments. But if you don't have any of those things, the essay, it's not going to matter. The essays communicate who you are. So if the stories aren't there, it's going to be a lot harder for the schools. The other thing I often say is the schools don't want to make risky bets, right? They have no reason to. They want to make sure bets. Sure, they'll make some risky bets of some risky bets, I'd say. But they want the people that they accept to do amazing things. And so they're going to look for evidence in your application. I mean, GSB says demonstrated leadership potential. Harvard talks about the, the history of leadership, all of these things. So if the schools can't find evidence of that in the examples that you bring to bear through your application, then they're going to be, but yet you're creating a really exciting vision for the future. They're not going to place a bet in the future unless they believe that you can get there, and they're going to look for that evidence in the resume and the essays and the recommendation. So you do need that core stuff. The writing can't change that. I don't know if that helps or not, but my take on it. Highlights: are there any things that give negative impression and thus we should avoid showing on essay in application process, such as lack of confidence? That's a good question. I don't really think so. Like, I think what you do want to show if you're showing sort of weaknesses is how you've worked to overcome them. And maybe how you've helped other people overcome those weaknesses too. Maybe, I don't know. I don't think so. Even the lack of confidence. I think the lack of confidence, it's my own personal thing. I tend to try to think about it, not necessarily calling it lack of confidence, but really thinking about what does it mean, or how does that manifest itself, and getting some specific examples of where that might manifest itself, whether it's, not challenging, but like bringing up a different point of view to a manager, or advocating for your point of view in front of a group of people. So I would try to like not bucket so broadly as lack of confidence. This is that one specifically, but really think about where that manifests itself and focus on that instead of it being a broader lack of confidence. But in general, no, there's nothing, unless I did have someone years ago that we were doing a mock interview, and I said, all right, well, tell me about one of your weaknesses. And he said something like, sometimes they get really aggressive and kind of want to fight. And it's like, okay, that one you can't say. You cannot say to an interview, you want to fight. So that one we had to kind of explore what he meant, and he really meant he was impatient. But beyond that, that was the only time that I've ever really heard a weakness. I was like, you can't tell the admissions board that you want to get into a fight. So beyond that, everything's okay. Doing online courses, doing online courses offered by HBS matter considerably as a way to show interest. So remember what I said, no amount of love can differentiate yourself for these schools. So, don't do it because you are trying to make HBS like take notice. Do it because, you want to build the skills. Do it because you don't have a business background, so you want to take the HBX core to build those business background, and so you can hit the ground running when you go to business school, or even further your career where you are now based on what you learn. Do it for those reasons. I do think some schools do appreciate it sort of outside of the Harvard and Stanford. It's not that Harvard and Stanford don't appreciate it. It's just don't do it just to kind of don't do it just to be like, hey, I'm taking the course. Do it because it matters. I think other schools value it even more as sort of a proof point that you're ready for business school because you've taken that time to prepare yourself. But I always kind of say, look, with these kinds of things, make sure they matter without business school, because we looked at the numbers. We know the numbers. So if you take one of these moves, make sure it's going to make sure it's going to benefit you no matter what. So like HBS core, for example, if that can help you advance in your career today, great. If you're just doing it for business school, try to figure out a way to be getting something out of it no matter what, in case business school doesn't happen. How important is community work on record important, like versus off record? Safwan. Schools have they're predisposed to believe you. They're also trained to spot red flags, so they'll catch inconsistencies for sure, but it doesn't have to necessarily be on the record, and it doesn't necessarily have to be official. You don't have to have a title. Community service. can come in all shapes and sizes. And by the way, for those of you who are not doing community service, that's okay. You know, at the aggregate, that's okay too. The schools do want to see that, and this goes for all schools, they want to see that you give yourself fully to this crazy world around us. And for some people, that might be learning guitar. For some people, that might be, you know, doing a food drive to help people impacted by the pandemic. Some people, it can be getting involved with their alma mater. It's not as much as like checking the box. I really do believe the schools want to see that you are interested in continuously developing yourself. You're not afraid to jump into the deep end, and you give yourself fully to things that matter to you. And that's what it's really about. Do the lead colleges give students a chance to do a second MBA, assuming the candidate, do Ivy League already has a master's degree? You know what, Siddharth, I don't know I know some schools are, so I have no reason to believe that it's an automatic like no. But you know, I think typically when I've seen it happen, and I don't know if I've seen it happen at HBS or GSB, but again, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But it's normally when the MBA would come right after the university, and in that case, I think the schools are open to it. I think as with any time when you're applying, you have to show that you've really thought about what you're going to get out of the business school experience, and why it is a necessary step in reaching your goals. Because they'll want to know that. They'll want to know, like, okay, you've already gotten your MBA. Why do you need another MBA? So you need to be in a position to answer that question. But if you can do that and really show how this move is critical, as far as I know, it's not a like automatic no or anything like that. It's just that's the piece that they're really going to be concerned about, is making sure that there's a need there. Okay. Okay, guys, this is the last question, I think. You guys have been great. Love these questions. All right. How do we know if my recommender is sending detailed recommendations or short ones? I get really confused whether to ask the same professor or approach others. Yeah, recommenders are really tough. Recommenders are kind of like, as many years as I've been working on, admissions coaching, I still like get stressed out about recommenders. I think I figure out how to help my clients help their recommenders, and it's just really hard. I think what you want to do is be clear about what is expected. And, you want to sort of give your recommenders every reason to be an advocate for you to sort of like bring them into the fold. Like, I'm applying to business school. I'm really excited. It's an incredibly competitive process. I was wondering if you could help me, and really help me shine in the process, as opposed to write my recommendation, help strengthen my candidacy by writing my letter of recommendation. And then the other thing is you want to remind them of why, of what accomplishments or ways that you've demonstrated or differentiated yourself. Oh, I'm using that word, vis-a-vis peers. You can remind your recommender of those sorts of things so that they have the fodder to then write a more substantial letter of recommendation. So, it's this tricky balance, because you need them to write it, and you have to put your trust and faith in them. But you can also, remind them of the things that you've done, tell them what you want them to highlight, and help them also, like, even telling them, the schools really rely on these letters of recommendation, and if you're worried about the length, give them some length. They really want to see 1 to 2 page recommendations, whatever that length might be. I think that's fine, and it's worth while to do. I also, one last tip is I generally say, I think it's easiest if you have to manage the same recommenders for all schools rather than have different recommenders for different schools. That's just my strategy, because managing recommenders is a lot of work for you. So the fewer people you have to manage, the easier it is. So I think that's it, guys. I hope this was super helpful. Listen, so please, as I said, this is my first official Gatehouse admissions presentation. So I would love you to learn more about Gatehouse. Go to gatehouseadmissions.com. You can learn more about what the genesis of the practice. And also there is an opportunity there to reach out for a free consultation. Love to hear a little bit more about you and what you're doing, and kind of give you any tips on the application process. So gatehouseadmissions.com. And guys, good luck. If you go for it, HBS or GSB, go in full throttle, do it, give it the time it needs. And I wish you guys the best of luck with everything. Thanks.